Throughout the Second World War, inside of the concentration camps, there were many different execution methods used inside of different sites. Inside of Dachau, some prisoners were subjected to salt water torture, and the treatment they were subjected to was a death sentence. But inside of the deadliest concentration camp, there was a huge amount of slaughter and death around every corner of Auschwitz. When the camp was liberated by the Soviet Red Army, the prisoners spoke of their ordeals at the hands of the SS guards. They told of an execution site inside of a courtyard between Block 10 and Block 11, and this became known as the Death Wall. This specific execution firing range was barbaric and brutal, and thousands of prisoners were condemned on it. Welcome to the Fortress. Today we look at the Death Wall, one of history's most brutal execution methods, and to support our channel, please make sure to click subscribe down below. Auschwitz was the largest concentration camp established by the Third Reich and the SS. Within the barbed wire fences, 1.3 million people would be imprisoned. But around 1.1 million people never made it out of the camp alive. They were killed in the camp inside of the gas chambers, and by the brutality of the conditions and the actions of the SS guards. There were many guards such as Josef Kramer and Derma Grazer, who were known for carrying out executions with their own hands. They would also drive hundreds of thousands of people into the gas chambers. The prisoners were aware of some of the more secret elements of Auschwitz. For example, they knew about what was happening inside of Block 10 and Block 11 at the camp. These two specific areas of Auschwitz were two large brick-built buildings, and the prisoners would usually walk and run past these very quickly, as they were concerned as to what would happen inside of these areas. Block 10 was a medical experimentation area, where the prisoners would be sent to have horrific ordeals at the hands of doctors such as Josef Mengele, the Angel of Death. If a prisoner was summoned to this block, they knew they would probably not get out alive, and they knew if they did survive, then they would probably be affected by their treatment for the rest of their lives. Block 11 was a torture and punishment area of Auschwitz, and within this block was a number of interrogation rooms and also prison lockups, where the SS officers and Gestapo agents would interrogate. Inside of Block 11, torture was used a lot and prisoners were subjected to devices such as the manacles, but they could also be beaten very badly and even killed if they did not give over information to their interrogators. Inside Block 11 were also standing cells, tiny oubliette-style dungeons, in which prisoners were forced to stand up constantly, and they could not sit down or move. They were locked inside these for days on end. Block 11 was also known for its cruelty and barbarism, but it was also known for being a place of execution, and specifically this was because of the Death Wall, which was next to the block in a courtyard. The Death Wall, which is seen today inside of Auschwitz concentration camp, is a reconstruction of what was there in the 1940s, and this is exactly what the execution firing range would have looked like during the Second World War. It was next to the two harrowing blocks, and it was here where many prisoners were executed, and some were specifically sent to Auschwitz and the Death Wall for their execution. But as the Second World War continued, thousands of people were sent to Auschwitz daily, and there were a number who would be executed as soon as they got to the site. Many prisoners were hanged on gallows in front of other prisoners, and their bodies were then left hanging for some time, but also prisoners in Auschwitz were shot in pits, and some were even given lethal injections to their hearts. But a number were sent on behalf of the general government of Poland for their execution on the Death Wall of Auschwitz. It was not a secret, but the firing squad who operated within Auschwitz, to begin with, executed many in a gravel pit or a quarry, but then at some point the executions were moved within the walls of Auschwitz, presumably to cover them up and keep them quiet, and this occurred around autumn 1941, and then the Death Wall was erected inside of the walled-off yard where many of the windows were boarded up to make sure no one could see what was happening. The executions began on the Death Wall on the 11th of November 1941, and the victims were executed in the back of the head on Poland's National Independence Day as an insult. The mass shootings performed made a statement against the prisoners, and 151 people were executed that day, one by one, going to the Death Wall, when they then encountered the executioner. The prisoners were forced to undress, and their hands were tied behind their backs, before the executioner approached them with a pistol. They were ordered to stand against the wall, when they were then shot ruthlessly in the back of the head. The prisoners then later held a Catholic Mass inside the barracks for those victims who were executed, But women were also executed on the death wall. They were also shot in the same manner. But they were allowed to undress in different rooms and areas, away from the men, before they were then taken into the courtyard, and they also had their hands tied before they were then shot. It was the horrific commandant of Auschwitz, Rudolf Höss, who made the camp that described the executions of the death wall as arriving in an unbroken stream, and he told his SS guards to deal with the executions quickly and ruthlessly. One officer claimed that some of these walking skeletons had spent months in the stinking cells, where not even animals would be kept, and they could barely manage to stand straight, and yet at the last moment many of them shouted "Long live Poland" or "Long live freedom." Some tried to offer some defiance, staying true to their consciences and beliefs, even in their final moments. However, after the executions, members of the Sonderkommando, fellow prisoners, were ordered to the death wall courtyard, and they then began the clean-up operation, as they would dispose of the bodies. The victims were taken to the crematoria, and they were then burned inside the ovens. People noticed the smoke coming out of these buildings most of the day, dealing with those who had been executed and killed inside of Auschwitz. But one issue was that many of the prisoners and victims of the death wall were never actually recorded on the camp records of Auschwitz, and it's not known the exact number of prisoners who were executed on the firing range between Block 10 and Block 11. A lot of these victims were actually prisoners of war who were sent by the German army, and there were around 4,500 Polish prisoners who were condemned by the courts, and with this many of them were sent to Auschwitz to be shot on the firing range. A number of Soviet prisoners of war were also sent from other prisons and military sites to be shot on the death wall. Because of this, it's considered that thousands of people were slaughtered on the death wall. There were roughly 10,000 Polish people sent to Auschwitz, and the majority were not registered, and they were then executed, and these are the prisoners who were specifically sent for execution. Also, 1,000 Soviet POWs were executed inside of Auschwitz, with many being shot on the wall. It's considered that because of this, there's 11,274 prisoners, and then 6,314 prisoners of war were executed inside of Auschwitz, and many of these took place against the wall. Inside of this figure were members of the Polish underground who had been accused of resistance activities, and following their interrogations, they were often marked as lost causes and were then executed. But the men who worked the firing range were members of the SS, and they would be gathered within the courtyard every single day to execute different prisoners. Many of these executioners were the most ardent and virulent SS members and Nazis, and they believed they were doing the rightful thing, executing thousands in cold blood. There was a number of sandbags placed in front of the death wall to make sure that no ricochets would take place, but on the 7th of October 1944, a huge mass execution occurred against the death wall. This was in reprisal for the Sonderkommando revolt and rebellion, and those prisoners who were tasked with dealing with the dead bodies rose up, and there was a huge execution ordered in revenge for this. During the revolt, SS guards were attacked, and one was even thrown inside the crematoria furnace alive. But prisoners after this were dragged to the wall, where they were then to be executed, and some were whipped inside the courtyard, being forced to witness the executions. The death wall was a horrific and brutal execution structure used within Auschwitz, and between Blocks 10 and Block 11 there were a huge number of people who were taken each day for their execution. The sound of gunshot would ring out from the courtyard constantly, and prisoners did not like passing this area of the camp, as they knew what it was there for. The death wall has been recreated today, and it shows exactly what the firing range looked like, and this was a harrowing part of the deadliest concentration camp. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.